Okay, so I almost forgot that freaking record button. So we are going to look at PFT 103 PowerPoint 5 here. So this is chapter 5, which is going to cover behavior therapy, right? Behavior therapy is kind of your classic. Actually, when I say classic, it's like your classic psychology, but it is actually a term that you're going to use, which is called classical conditioning. And it's the idea that classical conditioning is how you condition your dogs to learn new tricks. You say sit, and then like they hear the word sit, and that's like this initial moment, and then like you teach them some type of routine. So maybe you push their butt down, or you wait for them to kind of prop themselves up. And when you see that, they go through that routine, and then you reinforce that routine with like a treat, and then they go, oh, okay, I get it. Whenever I hear the word sit, if I do this, I get a treat, right? Or at least I get something in return. And so like that's classical conditioning. And so we can actually use that as sort of traditional behavior therapy to kind of, reinforce our good habits. When we see, junk food or something like that, maybe that's usually like an initial trigger that makes me go, oh man, I'm hungry. I should go get something. I should go get some junk food, because your brain's wired that way. Like in the past, you have seen something very calorically dense, and then you went through the routine of eating it. And when you went through that routine of eating it, all of a sudden you got a big burst of sugar, or fat, or something, just a big amount of calories. And your brain is still wired right now to be similar to your cave person brain, which is like, whenever I get calories, that's a very good thing, because we don't know when we're going to come by calories again. Like we're still kind of programmed that way. And that's why like some foods are so addictive compared to others. So if you go through that, where you see a box of Oreos and your brain goes, okay, I know that if I walk over there, peel the wrapper back, twist that Oreo, lick it, and then eat the whole thing, I will get sugar. And so your brain then gives you these cravings the second you see it. And you might not actually be hungry. Maybe eating Oreos is totally the right thing to do. I will, leave room in the world for that to still exist. But chances are it's just a false trigger. Like it's a false behavior. And so behavior therapy looks at that, and it looks at we use it. We use our understanding of behavior therapy to kind of interrupt that cycle. So if you're like, you see a box of Oreos and you go, oh, I'm hungry, maybe just take a second to interrupt that routine and go, well, let's see, am I actually hungry? Would I eat a couple stalks of raw broccoli right now? Like maybe ask yourself that, and you're like, no. I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm not really hungry, right? Like if your body's hungry, your body go, yeah, that'll fill a hole, But if you're not really hungry, your body's gonna go, no, probably not. So that's sort of one example, but we're gonna look at that sort of three-step process. We're gonna look at analyzing our what we could call an antecedent or a trigger, our behavior, and we'll look at the consequences of those behaviors. So we're gonna watch a little NASM video here that's gonna kind of explain everything we're going through today first, and then we'll kind of dive in.
Behavior therapy includes principles and strategies that are used by many people in the counseling profession today. In a guided self-help way, you can use many effective behavior therapy strategies while still staying within your scope of practice. You may have noticed that many people seek help for problems from friends and family members much more readily than they seek help from health professionals. The ideas and advice from such non-professionals can lead health seekers down problematic pathways, sometimes taking steps that cause more harm than good. Often, well-meaning friends and family will give advice based on their experiences and what they read in magazines, not advice based on science. In sharp contrast, behavior therapy offers the objectivity of science. Behavior therapy uses science based on studies of learning to provide techniques that have demonstrated their value, not in the opinion of a friend or family member, but through peer-reviewed scientific scrutiny. Some of the principles you will learn to use include positive reinforcement, response cost, contingency contracting, pre-macking, relaxation training, and more. You may have heard of even used some of these before, But here you'll be able to implement them in a way that makes sense for each individual client.
Okay. So those are a couple of the different methods that we can use. Like I said, to kind of interrupt this, we're going to start by just analyzing and learning the sort of basic version, the first 3 steps. If you've ever, actually, you know what? I'm gonna convert up to standing mode because I got a dog at my feet who keeps trying to jump into my lap, and he's gonna fall. Then I'm gonna be the guy who let the dog fall. So, all right. So behavior therapy, if we're looking at sort of the basic version, right? A lot of times before we came to behavior therapy, sort of the history of psychology started in the realm of like psychoanalysis. This is sometimes called like Freudian therapy or Freudian theory or whatever, which is probably what people think of when they think of like a therapist or studying psychology. You're probably thinking immediately of like Freudian therapy, which is like sitting on that weird shaped couch and just like staring at the ceiling while a therapist asks you about your childhood, and you go all the way back and you just say just talk and talk and talk. And it's like, all right, well, here we go. I'm going to go through 40 years of everything, and you're going to know everything there is to know about me. And the idea is that like with Freudian therapy, they look for something that's troublesome in your past because you eventually come to it, and then you sort of deal with it and talk about it. And the idea is that by reliving these things in the past, your thoughts, which have kind of shaped your entire life, can sort of be looked at from a different perspective and analyzed and fixed in a way. But here's the thing. There's actually a really interesting sort of upturn that happened in the world of psychology, where people started to kind of realize that Freudian therapy, Sigmund Freud was like, it's a good thing that he existed because he kind of invented the idea of the therapist. You know, he like invented this sort of realm, this job, psychology in sort of a way that it is. But he's very, this is such a like intense thing to say because it's something that we all learn about in school and stuff. He's pretty much wrong about everything. I mean, he was the first guy, like it makes sense that like we thought the earth was flat for a long time, like smart guys, just wrong. Freud, he thought that women's brains were different from men's. He had a lot of weird, kooky theories. And he thought that everything came down to like, how our brains are molded immediately right out of the womb, like as a baby. Now we're kind of coming to realize like that's not really true, and your thoughts really don't have as much power over you as we sort of thought. And so a lot of Freudian therapy has been sort of criticized for its high costs. It's because it takes so many hours and hours and hours to kind of go through it. And if you ever want to like learn more about like how the world of psychology is changing, I used to do this as extra credit, and I'm actually willing to do it again. I might even send out an email now that I'm thinking about it, for some extra credit, which would just be attendance, by the way. That's sort of how extra credit at Sochi works. We can't really give points away, but I can like sort of wipe hours away. So if you've missed a day of school or something, and you want to get your attendance up a little bit higher, we can do it that way. But for those of you who have like perfect attendance, I'll be honest, the extra credit doesn't do much for you. So let's see here. What's that called? Invisibilia. So there's this podcast by NPR. It's called Invisibilia, and it's kind of cool. It's all about human behavior and psychology as like a field. They have a bunch of really cool, like interesting, podcasts and this and that. But one of my favorite ones, I shouldn't have just gone here, Invisibilia, The Secret History of Thoughts. So this episode is actually a two-parter, but it's called The Secret History of Thoughts, and there are two of them. There's Dark Thoughts, and there's another one called The Locked In Man. And both of these are stories about two different people who have very different experiences, but who are basically the idea that the world of psychology kind of went through like a big upturn, and now it's kind of going through another one still, where we used to think that it was like your experiences as a child meant everything. That was like Freudian therapy. And then we kind of thought it's like, okay, well, it's not, that's not true. Instead, what's true is your thoughts mean everything. Your thoughts reflect like who you are as a person. Now we're kind of coming around to a different realm where we're like, your thoughts really don't really mean much. They're these things that kind of come into your brain, they sit for a second, and then they kind of leave. Or at least that's a lot of what the new realm sort of thinks. And so this podcast is kind of about that realm. Dark Thoughts is a really cool story about a guy, I think in Venice Beach, actually. I think he's like a LA guy, who all of a sudden starts having really, really violent imagery in his head. He starts having these like super intense, violent thoughts. He watches this movie with his wife. I think it's City of God, if you've ever seen that. It's like a movie set in Brazil. Pretty violent movie. And so he watches this violent movie and he gets kind of ill. It kind of bothers him. And he's like, I gotta go lay down. And so he like goes in the bedroom and lays down. And he can't get these like dark images out of his head. And then he starts fantasizing about all these really violent things, like him doing really violent things. And it kind of scares him. He's like, man, I need to go see like a therapist because I'm having super violent thoughts. He goes to a therapist, and this therapist is of the kind of second variety of therapy that we talked about, where it's like your thoughts kind of mean everything, not necessarily your experiences, but your thoughts. And so this therapist kind of is like, this guy's becoming a psychopath. Like this guy is going to become like a mass murderer because he's having like incredibly the other thing is like these thoughts of his are very, very detailed. Like he imagines, what would it be like if I walked to the kitchen right now and with my right hand grabbed a knife and then walked back into the living room and killed my wife? Like these really intense thoughts. And like, you know, in detail and stuff. So it freaks him out. He stops going to work. He stops he tries to not be around his wife as often. He loses a bunch of weight. There's a guy who was like a surfer and like, you know, super friendly and everybody knew him. Like super just incredibly friendly dude. And he starts having all these thoughts and stuff. And so then like his therapist like stops returning his calls because like they want to be distanced from this person, I guess, which sends him into a spiral. And then he starts really freaking out and his thoughts get worse and he gets worse. And now he's all but locking himself in his house, you know? Finally his wife begs him, she's like, just go see a different therapist. And so she goes and he ends up seeing a therapist of this sort of new realm, which is still sort of being developed now, which is like, your thoughts don't really mean that much. Like your thoughts come in and then they leave, you know? And like, they don't really reflect your long-term personality that much. You have a lot of control over your thoughts. And he's like, I don't have any control over my thoughts, you know? Like I just keep having these really evil ones. And so this therapist, I think at one point like grabs a knife and he's like, here. Like puts it in the guy's hands, like holds it up to himself. He's like, you want to kill me? And he's like, I'm thinking about killing you. He's like, no, do you want to? And he's like, well, no. He's like, yeah, see, you're not dangerous. Like, it's nothing. And he's like, well, why am I having all these thoughts? And so then it kind of turns out what he actually has is a kind of a rare form of OCD that was sort of triggered by watching this really violent movie. So OCD, a lot of people think it means just like being very clean. But what OCD actually is, it's obsessive compulsive disorder. You are obsessing over a specific thing, and then you have certain compulsions that if you feel that if you do those things will keep that thing that you are obsessed with at bay. So usually like some people who have obsessive compulsive disorder will be premeditating on like a number. They'll be like really disgusted and they'll really dislike this one number, and they feel that if that number exists in their life, you know, it'll hurt their family or themselves or something. And so they'll have this like, and that's where you see like OCD people turn a light switch off and on, you know, 1, 2, 3 times. And then they're like, no, that wasn't quite it. And they'll do it again. And it's like, close, but no. And then they'll do it and over and over and over and over and over again. And they have this compulsion that it's like, if I get it right, the world's safer. You know, like that's what the obsession is. They have an obsession with something. Sometimes it's germs, right? That's why some people are very like very clean a lot of times with OCD. Sometimes people won't walk on the sidewalk on like a specific side of the sidewalk, or they won't. Um, they'll try not to step on cracks and things like that. You know, it's funny. I actually do that a little bit, but when I'm running, I always like to see how many times I can avoid the crack in the lines. But that's sort of like a little bit of OCD. So it turns out he has this kind of interesting version. And the thing about OCD is like people are obsessed with something that they really dislike. So in a really weird way, it turns out that this guy is actually more moral than you or I. Like the guy having the really violent thoughts is actually a much less violent human being than the rest of us, because we see those images and we're like, eh. But he sees them and it bothers him so much that he cannot stop thinking about them. And so he was having this kind of interesting form of OCD. So that's the first episode. It's really fascinating. I recommend listening to it just for fun. It's a great episode. And then the Locked In Man is an interesting one where this young guy experiences the most terrifying disease that I can really think of on this planet, which is called locked in syndrome, where basically your entire body becomes entirely paralyzed. Even on like a certain like brainwave level, it looks as if you are totally unconscious, but you're not. You're actually conscious. You hear everything, you see everything. You are entirely conscious of every single thing going on in your life. And that's locked in syndrome. And so this young kid kind of grows up this way. And it's the second story is all about like his thoughts and how like all he had was thoughts. He couldn't like, you know, go down to, you know, he couldn't play video games. He couldn't like go to a theme park. He couldn't go to the movies. You know, he was just there. He remembers like nurses pouring hot, super hot soup down his throat because they didn't realize like it was overly cooked or whatever and too hot, and it was like burning the crap out of him and very, very painful, but he couldn't express that in any capacity. He remembers like people thinking that he was basically brain dead, and so they would just turn TV on and leave it on like Barney, you know, and he hates Barney, you know, like and so like what he would do is he would kind of go into his own brain. And to hear this guy describe imagination is a very unique thing. He describes like how he would basically go on these journeys in his head for weeks at a time. And to imagine, like I have a hard, like as somebody who has never had to use their imagination in a way like this guy has, I almost don't understand what he's describing, because like his imagination is so advanced, it's almost hard for a normal person to grasp. It's like trying to describe color. Like you tell me how to define blue. You figure out how to do that, I'll give you an award. Because like there's no way, yeah, it's like it's just what it's blue. Like, you know, like a blueberry. It's like, yeah, no, that doesn't help me. But what is color, you know? It's a thing that we all understand because we've experienced it, but like, you know, so to hear him describe imagination is a really, really unique experience, and that's all about your thoughts as well. And so both these episodes, they're really, 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 really cool. And I think they tie in really well to when we're talking about behavior therapy. And this is going to come back tomorrow when we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, which is similar to using like some of the principles of behavior therapy, but instead we are going to entirely focus on thoughts. And how like a lot of times people will have these really negative thoughts about themselves, and that's just not a very accurate way that you should perceive your world. You know, like you have a lot more control over your thoughts and actions than you think you do. Behavior therapy really does kind of focus on action. So I'm almost jumping the gun by talking about this right now. We are going to focus primarily on actions today. And then cognitive behavioral therapy, which is going to be tomorrow, our CBT lesson, that's all about like thoughts. And so like, but you're going to use the same kind of principles where you're like, okay, I had this initial thought, and then normally I go through this kind of spiral, and then this is usually the outcome. Like I see something which upsets me, and I do some upsetting things, and then like I end up like worse, you know. I get frustrated that I didn't do my work, and then I get down on myself, and then I don't do my work even more, which leads to more frustration. Like, or like I get frustrated that I can't, succeed in my diet, so then I overeat. That's cognitive, recognizing those irrational thoughts. Behavior therapy is going to focus a little more on actions, but there's 2 podcasts, so maybe listen to one today and listen to the other one tomorrow. Let's go ahead and go through. So behavior therapy is like, look, your thoughts you have a lot more control over them. They don't shape who you are, but they are sort of like, dogs that you are trying to go for a walk with, but is just way stronger than you. So you're just being pulled around, So we need to find a way to kind of take control over those thoughts, or at least in today's lesson, take control of those actions. So let's create some healthier actions, right? And so behavior therapy basically kicks Freudian therapy out the door and says, look, your childhood does not mean that like you have to deal with this for the rest of your life. Instead, let's take control over your actions. So I went on a bit of a tangent there. I appreciate you bearing with me. But those are some pretty fascinating episodes, so I definitely recommend watching them. And they do very much parallel what we're talking about today. So behavior therapy, by definition, is the application of principles that are derived from scientific research theorizing about learning to problems in living. So like, I actually think this is one of my least favorite definitions. But the idea of behavior therapy is it is to develop an understanding of individuals' thoughts from the perspective of learned habits, right? So we all have like all these kind of pre-existing habits in our life that are really just things that we learn from like the experiences in our life, There's a Jeff Foxworthy joke about how he talks about like his kids, and he's like, kids are so safe today. He's like, when my kids, it was like, if when I was a kid, it was like, you want to put a penny in the light socket? All right. And then bam, yeah, you're never gonna do that again, are you? And I had an experience just like that. I used to have this weird bad habit that my parents didn't stop me from doing. And I feel like if they had just explained it, they could have saved me this one horrible experience. But I used to always have my thumb touching the metal when I would plug something in. I don't know why I did that. I just always plug stuff in and like, for the most part it was fine, because eventually I had to get my thumb out of there and then it would connect to electricity. But one time I was doing that while plugging in a vacuum cleaner, and it like shot me across the room. Like I was like, ah! And my dad was like, see? And my parents love telling that story, because apparently I did that for weeks before they finally they got the moment they were waiting for, which was me being in pain. So that was, applying behavior therapy. It's like, okay, well, great. I'm definitely never going to do that again. If you've ever been to the gym and you've done a squat or a hinge or some type of movement, and you're like, man, that didn't feel awesome, I got to make sure that I'm pushing my knees out next time, or I need to make sure I don't lean so far forward, right? You have something that happens, and then you sort of learn based around that. The problem is there's so much stuff that we learn without realizing that we learned it. We all know this is an opinion, but I'm going to present it as if it's a fact. We all know the right way to eat an Oreo cookie. Anybody who just eats an Oreo cookie straight up is a weirdo. You are supposed to twist it, get the frosting off, I don't know, and then you can throw the other part away, or you can eat it. Dip it in milk or something, right? But the frosting by itself, that's how you eat an Oreo. Fight me, but that's that's a learned behavior, right? And so what we call the initial event when you first see something, we're going to call that an antecedent. By the way, you're actually going to see this concept come back in your nutrition class in Capstone. We're going to cover these 3 main behaviors again, because this is a huge part of understanding how our clients eat and buy groceries, right? How many times can you guys think of if you've been in a grocery store and you've gone shopping, and then when you get home, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot I bought these candy bars. Right? Or something that you had no idea, you didn't really think about it too much at the time, and it just made its way into your cart, right? grocery stores, by the way, are programmed to get you to do that. Like they're designed to get you to put extra stuff in there, which is one of the reasons why having a list is so important. But that initial event that is sometimes referred to as like a trigger. But the word we're going to use is called an antecedent. It's the initial event that sort of triggers a behavior, right? So maybe an individual has like a hard day at work. So that's like the initial event, right? That's like a trigger. Anytime your day is hard, what are you going to do? You're going to seek comfort in some capacity, right? Whether that comfort is sitting on the couch and just watching your favorite TV show for a half hour, or reading a book for a little bit, or calling your mom, or just venting about your day. A lot of times, like, man, how many times have you had like a hard day at work, and then the one thing that kind of makes you feel better is to go home and start whining about it? Like that right there, that seeking comfort, whatever it is that's like giving you that comfort, that's your organismic behavior, right? Which is a term that sometimes isn't like super helpful, but we're going to use the term like behavior, right? It's the behavior associated with some type of antecedent. So whenever this happens in response, right? A occurs, so B occurs afterwards. Or you see A, so then you do B, right? Like something, that's the antecedent and the behavior. So maybe this person seeks out comfort in some type of like junk food, right? They're like, well, my day was hard, so I'm going to have a thing of Reese's cups, that I picked up at the gas station on the way home, right? And then finally, you're going to have a consequence, right? And there's always like, whenever, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? So we know that like when you go through some type of like behavior, right? When you have some type of organismic behavior, it's going to have some type of effect. The effect of having Reese's is that you're going to consume high energy food, and that's going to result in an excess of calories. So the consequence is you're consuming calories that are not very nutritious, and they are very dense, right? So that's your consequence, or sometimes this is referred to as the outcome that's associated with that behavior. So what's unfortunate, we can't really do too much about our antecedents. We don't really have a lot of control over our triggers, no matter how well adjusted and how I want to be about not lose my temper when it comes to driving behind people. I still have to drive, and there are definitely still going to be people who do things that I think is stupid, or selfish, or things that set me off a little bit. I have no way of avoiding that. I don't have control over my antecedents, right? But I do have control over my behavior if I take the time to learn those behaviors, right? And I've gotten a lot better in the last few years about not completely flying off the handle when somebody cuts me off or doesn't get out of the way. Now I sort of take a little bit of time to think, and go, okay, it's not impossible that this person, has to check their phone because their wife's having a baby. Like, it's not likely, but it's not impossible. And that comforts me a little bit, because it's like, they're not selfish. They're not trying to make my life worse. They're just probably not noticing me, And so like, that's a much more that's a learned behavior. That's definitely not like a natural thought. But it is one that through a little bit of effort and time, results in different consequences. The consequences are me not losing my voice because I'm screaming or throwing stuff around my car. I'm exaggerating a lot of this, by the way. Don't think that I'm like a psychopath. But these are those. I have different consequences now. My consequences are that I'm a much happier person, right? So I may not be able to get rid of my initial triggers, but I can totally change my behaviors. If somebody has a hard day at work and they seek some type of comfort, if that comfort is in the form of going for a walk around the block and just taking some time where they leave their phone at the house and they just go to be alone with their thoughts and get out in the sun for a little bit and get some fresh air and go for 20 minutes of just relaxation, like active meditation almost in a way, that is a different, anytime you recognize that you are stressed, you go through some type of different behavior that's very healthy, it's going to result in different, healthier consequences. And this is where we got to get away from the idea that consequences are bad. Consequences are just outcomes, right? Consequences can be good or bad. We're going to see that a lot today when we're talking about conditioning our clients, because you need to deliver consequences for your clients when you're coaching them. But a lot of times the consequences of a good set, you know what it is? A high five, right? That's a consequence. Like whenever my client does something awesome, I'm going to give them a high five. And some of you got to meet me for the first time in person recently. And you noticed, and it's the quarantine world is very hard for me. And I was trying to think about how many high fives I gave out when I shouldn't have. It was many because I can't turn it off. I mean, I can turn it off. Actually, that's what this whole lesson today is all about. But I'm not willing to put the work in to turn it off because I like high fives. And that's another thing that you should, just, and that's moving outside of the realm of how to help your clients and just, being well adjusted. Recognize what you are willing and what you are not willing to do also is a big part of applying behavior therapy. It's not one they talk about a lot in this chapter, but at the end of the day, like if you talk about how you've been trying to change your habits and maybe you haven't been all in on that concept, and you haven't been 100% trying, you have to first take a second to reflect and say, okay, I'm not willing to put the work in to change these habits right now. And recognizing that will either push you into being willing to put the work in or tabling it for now so that you can do other things in your life, both of which will make you sort of more effective. Don't focus on being 100% better. Focus on being 1% better, and then do that every day. So, all right, let's move on to the idea of classical conditioning. So how do we do this, right? If we know that like these are sort of the three ways that if we know that this is how our brain works, right? Our brain goes, sees something, does something, and then there's some type of consequence. Sees something, does something, some type of consequence. Like if our brain's constantly going through that loop, right? Squirrel, and then chases off of it and runs off a cliff, right? If we know that that's how our brain works, how the heck do we reprogram our brain to keep it from doing all these things that we don't want it to do? How do we keep it from, having a stressful day triggering us to play 8 hours of video games? How do we keep, getting frustrated with like a diet and then skipping a workout in order to like recharge your batteries and have some me time? How do we avoid, actually, this is what I want to ask you because I don't know the answer yet. How do we avoid going out in the sun, getting hot, and then feeling like we definitely need a nap? If someone could help me figure out how to interrupt that one, that would be great. The answer so far is to stand in front of central air for 5 minutes and wake myself up. But the consequence of that is that my roommates make fun of me. So, so how the heck do we like apply this ABC sort of thing, right? Or antecedent organismic consequence. Well, one of the ways we're going to do this is through what is called classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about training a dog, right? So this is going to be through learning through associations. And that's between what we call an unconditioned stimulus, which is like a naturally occurring stimulus, right? You don't have any control over an unconditioned stimulus, and conditioned stimuli. So unconditioned stimuli and conditioned stimuli are both going to happen, right? But they're different from each other, right? An unconditioned stimulus is unconditionally or naturally occurring and automatically triggers some type of what we call an unconditioned response. So basically, like an unconditioned stimulus results in unconditioned responses. So when you smell your favorite food because you happen to be walking by a food truck or something, it's going to make you salivate, right? That's unconditioned. You don't have any control. You didn't know that there was like food wafting through the air, like a pie that lifts you up and carries you over in like a cartoon. You didn't know that like that was going to happen, right? It's unconditioned. But then you went through a totally unconditioned response in return, right? You then went through the routine of like, I'm going to work my way towards that pie, right? Like that's unconditioned. But then we also have conditioned stimuli, which is like, I want to sit down and I want to do work what's going to trigger me to do my work? What's going to trigger me to be like, to go do my workout, right? So a conditioned stimulus is associated with an unconditioned stimulus that triggers a conditioned response. So a conditioned response is like something that we can work and strive towards, right? So for example, like let's say your alarm goes off at the same time every day, right? And so then you slowly start to associate that alarm with getting up out of bed. And I know this is one that a lot of people struggle with, right? So so many people like hit the snooze button, right? That sucks. The snooze button shouldn't exist. They gotta kill that freaking thing. It's ruining the human race. Like, your snooze button is so comforting, and we all love it. You know, like I'm saying that, but I love the snooze button. You know, like I'm just like anybody else. It's great, but the problem is when you go through that, and then it gives you a few more minutes, it becomes automatic. And some days you need, you know, maybe sometimes it feels like you need the snooze button. Sometimes you're like, no, I just need 5 more minutes. I got 7 hours and 55 minutes of sleep because I went to be, you know, if I get this 5, it'll be the one thing that makes my life better. All right, fair. If that's the case, you're the one person who needs the snooze button that time. But the next day, you got 8 hours of sleep, but you have gone through this routine so many times, your brain's like, well, what I'm supposed to do now is hit the snooze button. When I hear that sound, I'm supposed to hit it once and give myself, what is it? It's 5 minutes, right? 7 minutes? Isn't it like an odd number by default? It's like 5 minutes on cell phones. I think
9.
Is it 9?
9 is.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think maybe like my phone is like set to 5, but yeah, like I think like regular alarm clock, it's some weird odd number. But yeah, so like that's not awesome, right? Like your brain is like, do you need, you know, but we're not really in a place, we just woke up, we're not really in a place to go, do I need 9 more minutes? You know, like you're not asking yourself that, you're just going through an automatic routine. Something happens and you are going through your unconditioned behavior. I mean, it became, you know, it was conditioned for a while because we reinforced it over and over. So this is where we want to create what's called a conditioned response instead, right? And that's learning through repeated exposure to some type of conditioned stimulus. So now, let's say you set your alarm clock for a specific time, right? So there's a conditioned stimuli. You set your alarm clock specifically. And now you are going to create a conditioned stimulus, which means whenever that alarm clock hits, your job is now to get your feet onto the floor as fast as possible. And you can use this in a way, to create like operant conditioning, right? And that's really what we're going to spend a lot of focus on. Operant conditioning involves learning that occurs by making associations between voluntary behaviors and their consequences, right? So this is where you need to take a moment. If you want to really make your conditioned responses effective, you need to focus on operant conditioning. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. There's a bunch of different techniques here. There's positive reinforcement, there's punishment, there's a lot. But operant conditioning is like, this is where, okay, so this happens, a trigger occurs, routine happens, and there's some type of consequence. So now let's say you find a way to somehow interrupt that, right? The trigger is going to occur no matter what. Again, we don't have much control over this, right? But we do have control over our behavior. So let's say you change your behavior. Now that's great, but you need to reinforce it so that your brain goes, okay, I'm going to do this again. And that's where operant conditioning comes in. That's where you can reinforce that effective behavior and draw a positive association with it, right? So now rather than being like, oh, all right, my feet are on the floor, I turn the alarm clock off and I'm up, and you're frustrated and you're like, I'm good, I'm up for the day, great, you won, you did what alarm clocks do, and then you go on for your day, right? That's not a very positive, very good outlook. You are going to draw the association that all of us kind of have with alarm clocks, which is like, and Robert, I know you're the only one here right now, but for those of you who are watching this video, do you have that moment when you hear an alarm clock in a movie and you go, ugh? Right? Like it's like you're in the movie, like you've been awake for hours, you're just watching a movie. When you hear that sound, you go, yeah. Right? Like my roommate cannot stand beeping. And so like we all have to be aware of like whenever the dishwasher or the microwave is finished, because beeping drives him crazy. He's like a beeping alarm clock when he was a kid. He's drawn like a negative association, right? Through operant conditioning, he has kind of gone, he's gotten to a place where he's irritated by beeping. We all gotten to a place where we're kind of irritated by alarm clocks, right? This is why you don't ever set your, some people do this and I think it's crazy. You don't want to set your favorite song as your alarm clock in the morning, because then you're just going to get sick of that song unless through operant conditioning, you create some type of positive association. So that's what we're looking at here, right? Operant conditioning is learning that occurs by making associations between your behaviors and their consequences. So coaches and clients can identify your target behaviors, and then you can use operant conditioning to increase the likelihood of those targeted behaviors. So targeted behavior is like, hey, I want you to exercise Monday through Saturday, right? Like that's the targeted, the behavior I want you to partake in is exercising 6 days a week, right? That's the behavior. How the heck do I get somebody to adhere to that? I get them to like exercise. I get them to find and draw a positive association. So many people think of going to the gym as a drag, right? They're like, oh, yeah, I gotta go to the gym. Like that's sort of what we think. I don't want people to have that kind of association, right? So I want them to draw a positive association. So for example, if somebody's learned to associate a certain time of day with going to the gym, whenever that time of day rolls around, they're instinctively going to get out the door. They're going to start working out. They're going to be like, I have a bunch of energy to burn. Oh, that's right, I'm supposed to go to the gym. Their brain, like the unconscious part of your brains are going to start doing all the things. They've done some really, really cool research on this, actually. And you do this naturally. Actually, hold on. I love this part, so I get really, I'm all scattered. Your brain will naturally do this if you start going to bed at the same time every day. Like me, I've been doing this for years because I get up at 5:30 to work out, right? And so like around 9:30, I always tell those people, it's like I'm like, it's like Cinderella. I turn into a pumpkin at 9:30. Like you will lose me. It's like, hey, it's 10 o'clock. You want to start a movie? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then 5 minutes into that movie, I'm like, oh. And it's like, oh, the time struck. Like it was midnight. He's gone. For me, midnight is around 9:30. I can last till I can hang till like 11:30. But I'm not a very good conversationalist after 9:30. Like my eyes start to water. I do a lot of I'm like, I'm listening, but not really. That's totally like how my brain works. And so there's some really interesting like physiology behind that, right? Your brain has this what's called a circadian rhythm, and it knows what time of day it is. And so when you start getting used to that time that your body normally goes to sleep, it starts to put you to sleep naturally. That's what your circadian rhythm is. This happens in other parts of your brain unconsciously, right? Your brain starts to draw associations and then it does things. One of the coolest ones is they started looking at neural activation of certain people as they went to the gym slowly over time. And it was a very weird thing. And like, this is kind of an interesting study because there's some definitely room for flaw in a study like this, because maybe they're drawing associations with having all this like equipment strapped onto them. But they started like strapping equipment onto people to measure like their brain activity as they like went to the gym. And what they saw was a big spike the moment they walked into the smelly gym. I love gyms, and I know this is going to sound weird, but one of the things about quarantine that I actually really dislike, I kind of miss, I got all my home gym now, but I miss the loudness of the gym. I kind of miss that weird smell that every gym has. I know that's so weird because that's not a positive smell, but I miss it because it's like I associate that nasty smell with something very positive. Like I associate with this room that I love, full of heavy stuff. And that's a weird thing to say, but they started and they saw people's brains light up as soon as they walked into the gym. Now, again, there's definitely room for error there. They could start drawing an association with like,
you know, going through this like equipment and stuff. But that's kind of an interesting thing. So that right there is kind of showing you what operant conditioning is. You start to draw an association with some type of trigger. And we want to create positive associations. And now what's interesting about creating positive associations, when I say positive associations, I don't just mean happy associations. Don't mistake positive for happy. Think of positive as effective or good. Rather than just like happy, because we can use things like punishment and negative reinforcement as our tools to create positive outcomes, right? Now, me personally, I'm not a big punishment guy. It's not really my favorite technique to use with my clients. You know, but it is, we have to be fair, it is a very effective method to create reinforcement. So let's look at this. Let's create, techniques for creating operant conditioning, AKA techniques for reinforcing habits, right? So first one we're gonna look at is everybody's favorite, positive reinforcement, right? Positive reinforcement is the addition of positive consequences after the person has produced some type of targeted behavior, right? So this is like when your parents would say, hey, if you go clean your room, we'll go out for ice cream. And you're like, hell yeah. This is a great economy. Cleaning my room means I get ice cream. I love this world, you know? Right? That's positive reinforcement, right? You start to draw this association. Cleaning your room is a drag. Good Lord, dog. Cleaning your room is a drag, but like ice cream rocks. So like, I'm definitely willing to do one to get the other, right? So that's positive reinforcement, right? You add a positive consequence, right? And we're using the word consequence here, but remember, consequences are just outcomes. In order to create a target. So if a client has a cheat meal each week after successful healthy eating, that's a great way to create positive reinforcement, right? This is why cheat meals have been shown to be so effective in all variety of diets. Like if you look at keto and you look at Atkins or paleo or all these like different types of diets out there, bodybuilding, just clean eating, all of them have some version of cheating in there somewhere, because that's the one thing that reaches across all diets and is always just effective. Because it's like, as long as I'm good 80% of the time, and I get like 20% goof around time, I can stick to that 80%, 100%, you know? Works 80% of the time, it works 100% of the time. So that's positive reinforcement. Now you've also got punishment. This is like the exact opposite. This is going totally in the other direction. Punishment is the addition of some type of aversive stimulus following a behavior that you want to decrease. So when you do something when someone does something we don't want them to do, we institute punishment so that they draw a negative association between that action, right? The reason we all like don't speed, hopefully, when we're on the road is this is going to make humans sound so selfish, but I mean, honestly, we kind of are. We don't do it because we care about the people around us. We do it so we don't get a ticket. Like, you know, that's because we've drawn a negative association with going above the speed limit. That's how punishment has sort of reinforced our habits. So if you punish your client, you have a client has to perform an extra 30 minutes of cardio in response to not following a nutritional plan, right? That's a really good example of punishment. It's like, oh man, if I fall off the wagon today, I got, if I go get like that 400 calorie Starbucks drink, because everybody at the office is like, hey, we're going over to Starbucks. You want something? And you're like, you're going to take this moment where you go, if I do, I got to go do 30 more minutes at the gym to burn off those calories. Like you're using punishment as a reinforcer. Not my favorite technique, but definitely effective. And then we have negative reinforcement. Now, a lot of people think punishment and negative reinforcement are the same thing, but they're very different actually. Negative reinforcement is not another one of my favorite techniques, but I like it more than punishment. And this is the removal of a negative consequence in order to increase targeted behaviors. Oh boy, hold on. I'm being attacked. Stop it. So, removal of negative consequences in order to increase targeted behaviors. So this is an example of like, you experience negative reinforcement probably every time you get into your car, especially anybody who drives a Toyota. Good God. I drive a Toyota and they are great at negative reinforcement. But when you get in, if you forget your seatbelt for like 10 seconds, beep, 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 and you're like, oh my God, fine. And you click it in, right? And then the beeping goes away. You removed the annoying thing. You negatively got it out of your life. So there's this thing that you hate. Negative reinforcement removes that thing that you hate. And so you're like, oh, thank you, thing. You know, that's negative reinforcement. It's the removal of negative consequences. Oh no. I may have to go get something to drink. There's something stuck in the back of my throat. Yeah, I think it's a freeze-dried strawberry. All right. So here's a really good example. A trainer removes a client's least favorite exercise or least favorite activity from a program because they've had like an excellent week of training, right? So maybe this is actually where using finishers are kind of an effective tool for trainers if they want to use negative reinforcement. Finishers are basically where it's like, all right, that's your workout. But before we go, we're going to do one big compound movement, as many reps as we can for 2 minutes. And so it's like, we're going to do a walking lunge curl to press for 2 minutes. You're going to get as many reps as you can. And we're going to see like how fast you can go. The idea of this is not necessarily to get faster overall. It's just meant to get, you know, if there's anything left in the tank, we're going to make sure that we kill it, you know, and that's a finisher. Sometimes you'll see people do burnouts. Burnouts are like where somebody will run the rack at the end of their workout. They'll have like an arm day or something. And then before they leave the gym, they'll do as many reps on this one, and then they'll do as many reps here. And they'll just work their way down until they get these little 5-pounders, and they're like, you know. But it's like there's just nothing left in the tank. Yeah, you did it. You burned away everything. That's a finisher. Negative reinforcement could be like, hey, you know what? If you really crush it today, we don't have to do a finisher. You know, if you leave everything on the gym floor, we'll remove that finisher, and that makes somebody go, okay, yeah, I hate the finish. All right, let's do this, you know? And so by removing something negative, you're negatively removing something, they can draw a positive association with like giving it their all, right? That's actually where, again, like I actually really like negative reinforcement, you know? And then we got a response cost. And response cost is the removal of a positive reinforcer to decrease the probability of the responses that removal follows. So response cost is the one that sort of seems like a little manipulative. But it's like if a trainer removes the reward associated with success in response to an untargeted behavior. So this is where it's like, hey, I'm going to take away your teddy bear if you don't behave. And it's like, oh, I have to weigh my options versus their consequences, right? That's response cost. So you remove something positive. It's very similar to negative reinforcement, except negative reinforcement is about taking something negative away, something like annoying away. Response cost is about taking something positive away. This is actually one of my least favorites. I think this is something that I'm not a huge fan of, but it's like, it is something that we use in the training world. A very common one, and this is why I tell people this all the time, and I hope you're better at it than I was when I first started. But charge your clients when they don't show up for their sessions. Not only will that make sure that your paycheck doesn't get tanked, but if they do not give you 24 hours notice, they get charged. It's on the contract, right? And you're not helping them you're not doing them any favors by being like, it's okay, and then just giving them the session back every time, because then they are going to continue these untargeted behaviors. Our target behavior is show up to your gym session on time, right? They're going to be rewarded by like a good workout. And so canceling and still charging them, that's an example of response cost. You need to give them 24 hours notice. I know it seems kind of harsh. And to be honest, guys, you can do like, I used to have a 3-strike policy, you know? Some stuff happens. We live in LA. Like, you know, there could be some random crazy person in a chicken suit holding a jar of mayonnaise stopping traffic. You know, like weird stuff's gonna occur. This is a weird town. You know, like, so it's okay to like let somebody off the hook every now and then. But like for the most part, you're really, really not helping your clients just by letting them be late all the time. So all of that, those are kind of the 4 versions of these things. Now, how the heck do we actually do this? Well, there's a lot of different tools. If those are the 4 main categories of tools, we have a lot of like different ways for applying these. And so one of these is going to be referred to as contingency contracting. This is we're going to spend a lot of time on this one because I think this is sort of like one of the most important. We've also got pre-macking. Pre-macking is kind of a fun method. Pre-macking is actually, I should tell you what they are. Contingency contracting is basically setting up a contract ahead of time. I like to call it managing your client's expectations, but it's literally like a small example of managing expectations is like when somebody walks into the gym and you're like, hi, I'm Brad, I'm your trainer. We're going to go over to the desk. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Then we're going to go to the floor. We're going to do a movement assessment and we'll come back and summarize. Right? Obviously, I'll usually do a little more detail than that, which I think anybody who's ever heard me talk knows that that's true. But that's my favorite version of just managing expectations. Contingency contracting is the same thing like in a session. You're going to say, okay, these are our targeted behaviors. And then you as the coach, you're going to monitor to see like, are they doing those targeted behaviors? If they are or not, you are going to deliver consequences. And delivering consequences is like, hey, you did everything you're supposed to do. Here's your reward. Hey, we tried to avoid this. Here's your removal of a reward. Here's your negative reinforcement, like whatever, right? And then maximizing generalization is the last part of that, which is try to make it as easy to perform as possible. Pre-macking is really cool. Pre-macking is basically, I love it because it's actually just named after the guy who invented it, this guy, David Premack. But basically it just means like, if you want to make it easy for somebody to adhere to something, surround them with that thing. You know, we all do a little bit of pre-macking, probably without realizing it. If you keep your coat by the door, you're less likely to forget your coat. You know, I keep my wallet and my keys on our dining table because that's like right near the door as I'm leaving. So I'm less likely to forget it. Stimulus control, kind of similar to pre-macking, but that's just like removing things from the situation. My favorite version of stimulus control is, you know, I always tell my clients, like, you can have things like ice cream, you can have sweets, they can be a part of your life on a healthy diet, but do not bring them into your house. You want ice cream? Go get it. You want candy? Go get it. Like, having it in your house, that's like where you can just fall off the wagon very easily, unconsciously. So that's stimulus control. Modeling is a big part of like what we do whenever we're just teaching our clients how to do stuff. But modeling involves like being a good model for your clients. And then relaxation training, which is using all these behavior therapy techniques to just learn how to take a moment, think about things, relax, and then act rather than react, you know? Which really, I love that that's at the very end of this lesson, by the way, because that is totally like pivoting right into tomorrow's lesson, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is all up here. Like behavior therapy is about like your actions as a whole. Cognitive behavioral therapy is about like analyzing all your thoughts and feelings. So let's look at contingency contracting, because like I said, this is probably the most important one when it comes to doing all of this. So contingency contracting, right, uses detailed agreements, aka a contract, to specify the expectations, the plans, the contingencies, and your targeted behaviors with your clients. So basically like, all right, let's sit down for our behavior change session. What is it you're trying to achieve? And they lay it out. Great, now we know exactly what we're trying to achieve, and you write it down. Boom, it's on the contract, right? Their goal, it's listed, right? Now, what we need to do is we need to establish what our targeted behaviors are related with that goal, right? So we're going to sit down and say, okay, so you want to achieve this. And so our behaviors that are going to reflect that are getting 10,000 steps a day, eating 2,500 calories per day, and getting 120 grams of protein every single day. Those are 3 things that we can do. Meanwhile, per week, our other targeted behaviors, we want to get into the gym and do a strength training routine for 45 minutes, 3 times a week. There's our 4 targeted behaviors. And your clients, and it's like, do you feel like you could stick to that? And your client's like, yeah, absolutely, great, cool. So right? There are elements, right? We have formed a contract in the beginning. We've got the first bit of our contract. Now we need to monitor our progress. This is going to happen over the course of like several sessions, right? I talked to my friend. I told you guys my friend Danae is looking for a trainer, and so I hooked her up with an ex student. I talked to her. I saw her yesterday and I was talking to her this weekend. And like I didn't know this. This student, she's rocking it. Like she is. She was like, I want you to send me like a detailed plan of like what you plan to eat for the day, and like, you know, just check in a couple hours, you know, and like she's like hands-on coaching like 7 days a week. I was like, that's awesome. And my friend Danae was very impressed. I was like, that's great. So, you know, they have targeted behaviors, and then you're going to monitor progress. Keep track of like your clients' outcomes, right? Now, remember, we just talked about this on Friday, right? What type of monitoring is the best type of monitoring? Self-monitoring, right? We know that like self-monitoring is the best way to monitor progress. Oh shoot, I realized I should have been moving through these slides here. So here's that 4 steps, right? Establish your behaviors, monitor your progress, deliver consequences, maximize generalization. Establish it, decide which targeted behaviors can produce the most effective change. Monitoring progress, systematic collection of information. And again, remember, self-monitoring is always better. Like if I'm just spying and keeping an eye on you, there's a little bit of pressure where you're like, oh, people are watching, you know, like, you know, you doing the dishes because you know it's going to annoy your girlfriend, right? Like that's a little bit of like monitoring, right? Like that's like, it's like you are worried about some type of external force. But if you are like, hey, how many times can I successfully do this, or how many dishes, what's the lowest number of dishes that I can leave in the sink over the next week, right? You monitoring that in your head, that's just much more effective. Self-monitoring has always been shown to be more effective. Help your clients monitor progress. You are there for that, but really get them involved. Make them do a food journal, make them do a workout journal. This is why, I mean, I told you guys how important like workout journals are to me, and how I used to make my clients always bring them. I had clients ask me, why do you make me take this? And like they'd get kind of annoyed. They'd be like, if it's so important that I bring this every session, why don't you keep it in that drawer over there? And I was like, because I want you to use it when you do your homework. Like, I don't need you to take it home. I just need you to keep it in the car so that if you are ever within 100 feet of this building, you will have your book. And that was the same. I use that same response for every single one of my clients. And then I go, oh, okay. You know? Then once you have monitored their progress, let's say they achieved it, let's say they didn't achieve it, right? We got to look, we got to analyze. This is where we are going to deliver consequences. Now, again, we have kind of a negative association with this word, but a lot of times those consequences are positive or whatever. So you are either going to use positive reinforcement. Let's say your client did something they were supposed to do. Positively reinforce them. Be like, nice freaking work. High five up top. You killed it, right? Compliments are a good example of positive reinforcement. Or be like, dude, you know what? Today, let's go hit the juice bar. It's on me, you know? If you have like free juice, I don't spend money. There's a line there. But that's a classic example. I used to do like fun little challenges. We do like weight loss challenges at my boot camps and stuff. And you know, we hit like a target overall goal with everybody. You know, we would do like I would set up like some type of workshop. Usually it was like an outdoor like what do they call it? When you bring a what's it called? Hold on a second. What's it called when you bring a cooking station? Brigade system, that's not right. It's a French thingy. Whatever. Anyway, I would bring like I'd bring a little hot plate, and I would like do like a little like, and I'm not a very good cook, but I would do these like example meal prep workshops. And I'd be like, if we get enough people who do this, I'll do a meal prep workshop. And I always wanted to do those things anyways. And so, you know, it just made adhering to that easier for everybody. And it was cool. It was always cool to see some people pick up the slack too. because we'd do it for like a 4-week thing. And like somebody would maybe life was hard and they just couldn't really, hit a lot of their goals. Somebody else could like pick up on it, which is always fun, and then get them reinforced. So little things like that are always a good tool, but that's positive reinforcement. You can also negative reinforce. It's like, okay, well, you know what? You have been on time for every session for the last month. I'm going to stop sending you those text messages 30 minutes earlier. Something like that, right? There's punishment, right? Like say your client didn't do a targeted behavior. It's like, all right, well, we got to do an extra 30 minutes of cardio today, right? And then response cost, right? Where it's like, all right, the most harsh version ever is like, all right, well, you're not my client anymore. No. Response cost is like, okay, well, in the past, we've really enjoyed like, jumping straight into the workout because I taught you a stretching routine that you're supposed to do, and you're always supposed to be warmed up before our session starts. Haven't been doing that lately. We're gonna have to cut into our session time to get you warmed up because I'm not comfortable working you out unless you're stretched out first. There's a response cost. And like, oh man, like the working out part is the part I want to engage in. And it's like, well, we're gonna get there, but we lost some of it, That's an example of that's a great example of response cost that I have had to apply forever, by the way. I like cooling down with my clients, but honestly, I really like to teach my clients how to do their own warm up, because that gives us more time to work on things and gives me time to coach, and all the stuff that like isn't just like training your client, isn't just working out, gives you time to like have those conversations. And I always have, every gym has it set up where you can see the stretching area. So it's very easy for you to kind of keep an eye and just look for your next appointment. Like, you got 10 minutes left in your current session. Your client should be over there doing the stretches that you taught them. And if they're not, it's one of those things where it's like, man, like, all right, we got to stretch out now, which means you're going to lose 10 minutes as we got to go through this process. That's a good example of response cost. If you want the 10 minutes back, you got to, get here on time. So lastly, and arguably most importantly, you need to maximize your generalization. So generalization is the maintenance of these behaviors across time. What you need to do is you need to hedge your bets, right? If anybody knows anything about like the world of investing, I know Amazon's amazing. Don't put all your money in Amazon. Like, yeah, they're going to do better a lot of the time, but not 100% of the time. So let's put some money in eBay, so that you can kind of balance that out. Actually, those are both tech. Put some money in like bio or something. You want a diversified portfolio. You want to have money in a lot of different places, so that you generally succeed. That's important for your clients as well, right? You want to make it as easy for them to succeed as possible by making all of this stuff general and easy to apply to. So ensure that your client has the ability to adhere to the program as easily as possible, right? One of my favorite ways to do this, right? One of the best ways to make sure that it's easy, I always tell my clients, I'm like, keep your shoes by the door. Like, so that you trip over them, when you walk in, you're like, that's right, I got to go running. Right. And it's like, and you kick off your work shoes and get the running shoes on, make it as easy as possible for you to adhere to that program. It's hard to take the time. Like if you're very inactive at work and you are trying to get 10,000 steps in a day, it sucks if you get through your whole day and you've only achieved 3,000. 7,000 steps is going to take you probably about an hour. So now you got to go for an hour walk at the end of the day when you're already tired. It would be so much easier if we took the stairs on our way to work, if we parked far away, if we got up every hour on the hour and did like a lap around the, just to say hi to our boss or check in with somebody else rather than sending them an email. I know we all live in this world right now where it's like, this could have been an email. But for your health, it's the exact opposite is true. I love, that's actually I have a GIF that I keep on my phone for when people call me and I send them I'm like, this could have been an email. So that's totally the opposite, but that's an example of maximizing generalization. Make it easy for, make it fit into your life. Don't try to do something. Don't pick a gym across town. Pick one near your house. Yeah, maybe they don't have that leg press machine you want, but even if they don't have that leg press machine, you're going to go to the gym more often, which means your legs are going to get stronger because you didn't miss so many sessions. That's maximizing generalization. Make it generally easy to be part of your life. All right, so one of the ways to actually do that is pre-macking. Pre-macking is a form of behavior therapy that is going to basically pair a targeted behavior with something that is naturally occurring, right? So maybe maybe when I was a kid, and my parents would drop me off at my grandma, because my parents both worked. They'd drop me off with either my grandma Val or my grandma Nunu. Her name was Eunice, but I couldn't say that when I was a kid. So, and whenever I go to my grandma Val's place, she would take me for ice cream every time we would go to Dairy Queen. But like grandma, not a healthy grandma. She's still got, cholesterol problems to this day. And that's where my mom gets her genes from, which is where I get my genes from. So something I'm keeping an eye out for. But luckily, grandma set me up with like a deep love for walking around, because grandma did a great job of like, the grandson is here, we have to get ice cream. I am unlikely to walk, but if I know I'm going to go get ice cream, we will walk to go get ice cream. So she paired an unlikely behavior, which is being as active as she wants to be, with a likely behavior of, doting on her grandson, which nothing's going to stop her from that. So, so we'd walk. It was great. We would do this lap around the park, and we'd feed the ducks, and then we would go to Dairy Queen. That's a great example. So here's a little more applicable to our realm, right? A trainer would instruct their client to put their running shoes in a place where they're naturally going to find them and be tempted to put them on. I actually have like a classic example. I'm always wearing running shoes because of this industry, but like I'm sort of like the opposite. If I get home and my shoes come off, it is so hard for me to get back out the door, which is why I have to work out in the morning. I know I'm going to go to work at a certain time, so I have to do my workout before I do that. And that's what works for me. Somebody else could be totally different. You're going to need to look at different tools, different strokes. But that's an example of like pre-macking. Just put something near something else, right? Really, 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 really similar to pre-macking, but so pre-macking is almost, that is a really good example of maximizing generalization. And it's really using like a bit of positive reinforcement. It's using a little bit of response cost, right? There's a little bit of that kind of blended in there. But then there's also like stimulus control. This is a really good example of almost like negative reinforcement, right? Stimulus control is basically where you create a condition where it's really impossible or very difficult for you to do these undesired behaviors, right? Again, my favorite example of stimulus control is keep that ice cream at Baskin Robbins. Keep it at Cold Stone. Do not keep it in your house. If it's in your house, you are likely to, do this undesirable or untargeted behavior naturally without thinking. Now, if you think about getting ice cream and you're like, you know what, I'm craving some ice cream right now. And you go, do I really want it? And you're like, yes, I really want it. Great. What's the point of living longer if you're not living? Go get it, right? But if you're like, yes, I really want it, but I don't want it more than putting on my shoes, grabbing my keys, getting in the car, sitting in traffic. So I don't want it that much. I'll do something else instead, right? That's a really great example of stimulus control. So removing ice cream, actually, that's the example I put up here. Removing ice cream, I've been using this example for years. Removing it from the house in hopes that if someone has to leave the house to get it, they'll find it undesirable, right? They'll be like, it's worth it, it's not worth it, for all these different things. There's a couple different ways you can do this, by the way. There's environmental control, which is sort of what I just described, right? Reduces the availability of this in an environment. There's also like stimulus narrowing, which just basically strengthens the association between like a behavior in a setting, where like by not having it in your house, through like that environmental control, you then start to not draw associations. Like you don't have, it's like, oh, ice cream's not in my house. I'm kind of like this with alcohol, actually. It's kind of a weird thing where like I only associate drinking with like being in a bar. Anytime somebody brings over like beer or like something because we have like an event or a party or something, it just sits around for months and months and months and months and months. And people like make fun of me. They're like, why haven't you like drank that? Like you've had one beer in the same shelf for months now. And it's like, I don't know. I just don't associate it with like part of my life in a house, you know? Or like, oh, I do associate with like a party, but then like, when I'm hosting a party, I'm usually like engaged in, conversation or making sure that there's enough like stuff or, I'm busy or I associate, I'm playing a board game or something, so it's just like, that's an example of like stimulus narrow. I don't really see my house as a place to consume alcohol. At a bar though, totally, like absolutely, right? Same thing is true of like popcorn. I used to eat popcorn and soda all the time when I was a kid with my parents. We'd like watch movies. But now I never have that stuff in my house. But you get me to a movie theater and I'm like, oh, that's right. This is where I eat popcorn and soda. Right? You have an association with a specific setting. And that's kind of cool, right? Like that's a good way to kind of enhance things. If you want to make sure that you only associate like when you eat at home, you eat healthy. When you eat out, that's when you have your cheat meals. That's a much better way of going about it. And then there's modeling, and modeling is, visually demonstrating specific actions, right? This is something that we definitely as trainers are going to do naturally, just in terms of teaching people how to exercise, but it's also a big part of like how we teach people. This is an example of why I like to use so many personal stories when I'm teaching people things, because it shows that like, hey, like I'm definitely not perfect. I'm, engaging in a lot of this stuff as well. But I think the message that I try to get off a lot of times is that like, hopefully everybody notices that when I do make a lot of these decisions, that if they are unhealthy, a lot of times they are decisions. They're not, naturally occurring. There's something that I choose to engage in. Like I just said that there is no nutritional benefit to popcorn. There's definitely no nutritional benefit to soda. But the benefit of having it in your life is that I'm more likely to stick to a healthy overall diet by engaging in every now and then. So it has value. It's not nutritional value, it's behavior change value, but it is value of some type. Hey, no. So like by highlighting that, right, I like to, that's what I mean when I say modeling, right? It's demonstrating an action in order to help your clients learn how to duplicate that. So if we're looking at this, calm down. Lay in your bed. Yeah. So our 6 steps here, if we go through this process, honestly, guys, contingency contracting does this better than these 6 steps do. I'm a little biased because I love contracts and I love managing expectations. So I'm definitely biased towards this, but I think that this is a much better example. But here's how you can kind of see modeling and everything else in action. So carefully define the desired behaviors, right? So elaborate in a very detailed description what your clients' like targeted behaviors are, right? Again, we want to do this, that, and the others, right? Then execute the play, right? So instruct your athlete to try to execute that specific play as best they can. So it's like, you're like, okay, I want you to, sprint over, touch this cone, side shuffle all the way through, and then through, right? So you define it, then you have your, then you execute it, and then you're gonna judge that execution. So then you're gonna have your client come back and say, okay, here's what I saw, here's what happened. Then we describe what was incorrect, and we describe like what was correct. They don't have like describe what was correct here, but they totally should. You wanna like define like what went right and what went wrong with your client, and say, okay, so you did this really well. You went in the right order. I loved how you kept your feet, your base of support like over your body. However, when you're doing your side shuffling, you keep bringing your feet all the way together. You want to go feet wider than shoulder width apart, feet shoulder width apart, wider than shoulder width apart, shoulder width apart, not wider than shoulder width apart, feet together. That puts you too unstable and it slows down your side shuffle. Okay, do you see what I mean? And then so then you're gonna provide that feedback, and then you're gonna model the correct execution, which I was kind of doing right there, right? You're showing your client what it is. Then imitate the correct execution. So then you're gonna have your client go through that slowly until they get used to it, right? And this is what how you can do a really good job of correcting your client's form. I like this 6 steps right here in terms of modeling. I don't like it when you pull it out and expand it to overall behavior change, because I think that it has, I think it's missing some steps, and I think it uses too much elaboration in other steps. But this is great in the middle of a session when you're like, okay, we're gonna do a squat, curl to press. So it's gonna look like this. You're gonna go down, curl, flip the palms, and press, right? And then they do it and they do something like this. It's like, great, really, 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 really close. Your curl was really good, but then you kept your palms supinated on the way up. I want you to flip them and get your hands pronated, okay? So rather than here, which is what you were doing, I want you to flip it and go out like that. And go, oh, okay, great. And then, right, they kind of get that whole step and they're like, got it. Cool. And then you move on, right? Now, one thing that we're not going to cover too much into, although this is a big part of something that you'll have to do in some situations. Another part of behavior therapy, although the reason we don't cover this much here is because there's a better version of it coming in CBT tomorrow, is assertiveness training. So assertiveness training includes emphasis on learning how to be more assertive. Sometimes your clients are going to really struggle with telling people in their life that they are on a fitness journey. This is pretty common. It's usually a spouse's fault. A lot of times it's your significant other who is trying to pull you off the wagon. And that's endearing in a way, but sometimes we do need to teach our clients how to be a little more assertive, where it's like I had a woman who was she was a professional chef who ran her own restaurant and stuff. And then she also loved cooking for her kids. And she had, slowly been gaining weight over the years until eventually she got to a point where her kids got her a chair to sit in while she was cooking and stuff. And it was like, man, we are going in the wrong direction here. And so we kind of worked together and we were like, we kind of need to understand that it's okay to be assertive. And she was like, well, I try to eat healthy, but my family wants to eat this and that and this. And it's like, I'm on a weight loss journey, but they're young, it's their kids. It's they have metabolisms, they can handle it. They're not really it's not unhealthy for them, but when I eat it, I have a really hard time struggling with my weight. And it's like, okay, well, clearly, and it's like, well, let's analyze what's going on here. And so, I helped her kind of break down. It's like, why'd your kids get you the chair? And they're like, well, they wanted to help me out. It's like, great. They wanted to help you out because they love you, right? They're doing what they're trying to enhance your life. And it's like, yeah, of course. And it's like, so we both agree and we both believe that your family has your best interests at heart, right? She's like, yeah, of course they do. They're my family. Great. But we have not taught them that the best way to enhance your life is losing a little bit of weight, lowering your cholesterol, lowering your blood pressure, and all these other health problems that she had. She's like, right. And I was like, so now we need to teach them. It's like, so how are we going to reach those goals? She's like, well, again, diet and exercise. I was like, yeah, of course. But they don't know that, right? I mean, they do know it. I mean, obviously you've, maybe said hey, I'm trying to eat a little healthier, right? But you haven't explained why you're trying to eat healthier or why it's important for them. And she's like, well, what do you mean by that? And I was like, well, try this instead. Next time you see your family, say, hey, we're going to have this healthy meal. And when they say, yeah, but what about if we throw some of this in there? And it's like, hey, well, I don't want to throw that in there because what's important to me is to eat healthy right now. And I know what's important to you is to enhance my life as well because you love me. So by eating this healthy version of a meal, you are going to be showing me affection. Like, draw that connection for them. You don't have to say it that way. You should definitely, in fact, you shouldn't. You should be more eloquent than I'm being right now. But help them draw that connection between, okay, I can sacrifice this chocolate dessert, for some healthy meal because that's my way of like showing and being on team mom, and it was great. And it was really cool. Like, she ended up throwing the chair away. That was a big day. That was like one of my favorite. I was like really excited the day that happened. She sent me a picture of like where she had tossed it in the dumpster, which, by the way, have you ever seen a restaurant dumpster? Whoo! That chair was not coming back out of there afterwards, which was really exciting. So when it comes to assertiveness, and sometimes it goes the other direction. That was a very kind of heartwarming example that worked really, really well. Sometimes it also does involve being aggressive, like assertive, like actually aggressive, which is like learning how to actually say no, right? So if you are learning how to be a little more assertive, eye contact is huge, body position is huge, facial expressions, like maintaining a neutral facial expression rather than like an aggressive or sympathetic one. Your voice tone and inflection and volume, right? And then there's always like the most important, which is like timing and content. I mean, this is like when it comes to, if you've ever had like an argument with someone, sometimes there's a right time to bring it up and a wrong time. These are really important as well. And then also keep things relevant to what it is you're talking about. Do not stray. So that's assertiveness training. Like I said, we're going to see a much better version of this in tomorrow's lesson. So I kind of moved past that one a little quick. But last little bit, we're going to wrap up today. Let's look at how we can apply behavior therapy. Because remember, this is just one of our tools, right? You don't have to always apply behavior therapy, just like you don't always have to use goal setting. But you can use both, or you could use one or the other. This is one of the tools on our tool belt. So how do we apply behavior therapy for pre-contemplation? Remember, pre-contemplation is somebody who's not intending to change. So we're going to focus on behavior therapy by just helping someone become better informed. Pre-macking and stimulus control are great ways to do this, right? Just inundate this person's life with the healthy benefits of exercise, right? And so then like, it's almost like, when you hear a word you've never heard before, and then it just feels like you hear that word everywhere, like all the freaking time after that. That's kind of an example of like pre-macking and stimulus control, except we want that word to be the gym. Right? It's like, hey, look, it's cheap. Hey, look, it's near you. Hey, look, it's easy. Those are examples. Again, you're not going to get a lot of pre-contemplation clients, but if you have anybody in your life that you've been trying to get to exercise more, here you go. This is your tool. Contemplation, somebody who might change within the next 6-month period. They want to change, but not now. Right? Yes, I want to change. No, I'm not ready. Right? So the focus should be on behavior therapy to get them to identify how this can reflect their life, right? How can we get them to, oh my God, I'm in a group text, mute. How can we get somebody to see the benefits of exercise in their life directly, right? Before we were just trying to get somebody to see like, yeah, okay, fine, I admit it, exercise is good, right? Now it's like, okay, I get it. Exercise is good for me, right? That's the contemplation stage. So maybe it involves creating a contract. This one kind of makes, I mean, it's in the book and they're the experts. This one makes me a little itchy. Creating a contract seems a little intense for somebody who's in just the contemplation stage, but it should just have a behavioral goal about identifying some of the positive ways to get healthy. So just be like, you know what? We don't need to exercise, but I want you to look up 3 ways that your life would be better if you started exercising and eating healthy, right? So then that's a great example of like, getting them used to that. There's also the very manipulative version down here that I love to show people. If your client likes getting massages, get them the massage at the gym. Get them a gym membership with massages, AKA Equinox, right? And that way it's like, I'm already in the bill. Okay, fine, And there's pre-macking. If your client's in the preparation stage, so like this is somebody who actually is, getting ready to change sometime within the next 30 days. This is where we actually can kind of sit down and make a contract. So set up your first 3 phases of your contract. So, be like, okay, what are our targeted behaviors? Are we working on diet? Are we working on exercise? Are we working on diet and exercise? Right? Like, what are we working on? And then talk about like, okay, so after we get started, we are going to be like, hey, this is how we're going to monitor progress. I'm going to continually check in with you. And then here's the rewards and consequences, right? So we are going to lay out the entire 4-step contingency contracting method, right? So we want to explain to our client that we're going to set up our targeted behaviors. We're going to set up our consequences. We're going to deliver those through monitored progress. And then we're going to try to make it as easy for our client to adhere to as possible. If they're in the action stage, your contract can get a little more intense. You can create harder goals. And that's really a big one. But you also, again, can pre-mac things by being like, all right, you've been exercising regularly. Let's step up the bar and get it into your normal everyday life. No more elevator. All right, you have to park at least 500 feet away from any store that you're going to go into. From now on, if you want to go to have ice cream, you got to walk to Baskin Robbins, right? Those are things that you can do once somebody has already adopted healthy behaviors, right? Well, once they've already kind of gotten, it's like, okay, I'm going to the gym regularly, right? Now we can kind of push them a little bit in their home life rather than just in the gym life. And then if they're in the maintenance stage, this is where it's like, all right, well, now we got to help them maintain that change. How do you keep them to maintain change? Give them something more intense so that this just has to be a fact and they can spend time focusing on something else that takes energy. So now maybe go to a group class, create a more intense updated contract with new goals and rewards. This is the one that I think is the most applicable. But yeah, get them to the next level. That's where it comes in. And that is sort of the 5 different methods that we've got there, right? Modeling, contingency contracting, pre-macking, stimulus control, and then classical conditioning. At the end of the day, all of this is coming down to just creating like healthy habits, right? And so we're going to be able to always do that by recognizing what our existing habits are and reflecting and coming up with a plan for how to change those. At the end of the day, like if you don't apply any of this, the one thing that I would say that everybody could use like a good dose of is just simple awareness. And we're going to talk a lot about awareness tomorrow. Awareness of your thoughts, awareness of your feelings. And I'm going to show you guys my favorite video on the internet tomorrow, which I'm really excited about. Robert, you the only one here. Do you have any questions? Did it feel like you just read The Power of Habit again?
Yeah, it's just, this is all different terminology, but.
It's totally the same thing, right? Yeah, that's what I love about that book. Like he took a heavy psychological concept and turned it into a super fun book full of stories. And for those of you who are just watching this recording, if you want to become an expert on this stuff, pick up this book. $3 used on eBay. Never buy books new. All right, guys. I'm gonna let everybody out of here. See all you all tomorrow.